and this is moving right along. So welcome everybody to Cafe Cinematheque. And looking at the names, we are all, everybody's, as membership chairman, I know that everybody that I see in the list is a friend. So thank you all so very, very much for all of your support. In case I did miss somebody who's a guest, welcome joining us, and please become a friend as well. Check us out at www.stirlingfriends.org. Shelly, we are so thrilled that we have you on board with us and that we share you with, I guess, FIU and FAU, and you have to be one very busy person, and everybody wants a piece of you, and I could sort it, and we could really understand why. So tonight's movie, I personally saw it a few years ago, to the point that I remembered it and was delighted to see it again. It was absolutely worth a second watch, probably even a third. I thought it was wonderful. As far as I know, it was only on Canopy. Rhonda and Shelly and I discussed this before. Some of the movies are only on Canopy. Miami-Dade people don't have the access to that the Broward members do by getting Canopy. And so sometimes I think it's a little frustrating for them, even some of the people in Palm Beach County. The good news is that the next movie, The King's Choice, in addition to Canopy, is on Amazon Prime regular streaming. So if you have Amazon Prime and Canopy, you have the double whammy. If you don't, and you have Amazon Prime, you might prefer to watch it there, but you will have a choice. So, Shelly, I'm really looking forward to hear all that you have to say about Ida. And I hope everybody loved it as much as I did, and as you did.
Thank you, Marilyn. Thank you, Marilyn. Thank you. It's great to be back. It really is. It's a thrill to be here. I just want to tell everybody, if to make your life easier in terms of finding films and where they're being shown on TV or on your computer, I put into the chat, if you just go to the chat at the bottom, and it says justwatch.com. And if you go to that site, it has a search box, and you just put the title into the search box, and it'll tell you exactly where it is. It'll tell you where it's free. You have a choice where it's free, or where if you want to pay for it. If it's not available for free, how much it is at each site. Because sometimes you can get it at Amazon for $1.99, and at Apple it's $3.99. So you have all these choices. And it'll also tell you if it's free at those places. So I recommend that you can download the app and put it on your computer. You can put it on your phone, and this way you could always check where you can see a film. So just to make life a little easier for everybody. Okay, getting into Ida from 2013. The director's name is Pavel Pawlikowski. And just to give you a little background on the director, he was born in Warsaw, Poland, to a father who was a doctor and a mother who started as a ballet dancer and later became an English literature professor at the University of Warsaw. In his late teens, he learned that his father's mother was Jewish and had been murdered at Auschwitz. At the age of 14, he left communist Poland with his mother for London and what he thought was a holiday, and it turned out to be a permanent exile. A year later, he moved to Germany before finally settling in Britain in 1977. He studied literature and philosophy at Oxford University. He garnered early praise for a string of documentaries that he made in the early 1990s and for a couple of award-winning features. One was called The Last Resort in 2000 and My Summer of Love in 2004, both English language films. Ida was his first Polish film, for which he won the Oscar in 2014 for Best Foreign Language Film. And he followed that up with a film entitled Cold War, which is also available on Amazon Prime. And I think it's also available on Canopy in 2018. And in 2019, it was nominated again for an Academy Award. He won the Best Director prize at the Cannes Film Festival and was nominated again for and he was nominated for Best Director for Cold War, as well as Best Foreign Language Film. The film itself is an excavation of truths. Excavation is a good word for this film that remained 70 years after the Holocaust and 25 years after the collapse. Actually, it's actually longer. It's 30 years after the collapse of communism. Anna, or Ida, as she comes to be known, is a 19-year-old novitiate, as we've seen, ready to take her vows. We watch her transform from an empty vessel with little knowledge or experience of the world at large into an individual with intelligence and the awakening of wisdom. Wanda, her aunt, is a communist state prosecutor who has fallen from grace. She was part of the 50s show trials when they consolidated power to eliminate enemies. She has become a cynical human being, as we see when she first meets Ida. And then there is Liss, the third character in this film. He is the saxophonist they pick up along the road. By the way, Liss translates from the Polish to fox. So that should sort of have a little bit of meaning. Anyway, Ida and its characters are all alert to the absurdities of Polish history, as well as its abundant horrors. We see it pop up in little humorous notes along the way in the film. Priests and peasants and provincial officials, like the police and Liss himself, provide a hint of the youthful 60s spirit amid the gloom and bad memories. It unfolds at the crossroads where Catholic, Jewish, and communist strains of Poland's endlessly and bitterly contested national identity intersect. As many of you may know, Poland has been going through another period in the last few years where they outlawed any mention of their participation in the Holocaust. You can go to jail if you talk about it. So they've been clamping down too, trying to rewrite a little bit of their history. Having set up an obvious contrast between Wanda and Ida that we see in the film, atheist and believer, woman of the world and sheltered child, sensualist and saint, the film proceeds to complicate each woman's idea of herself and the other, while their black and white conceptions of the world turn grayer by the hour. They turn grayer by the hour as the film continues. When we first see Ida, she's rehabilitating an icon of Christ. Remember, she's painting the icon, sort of rehabilitating the icon, because in Poland, the church was frowned upon under communism. And we see the other novitiates place the icon into the snow, in that fountain in the snow. And it's interesting, in the next scene, she and the Mother Superior lock eyes for a second. And the Mother Superior calls her into her office, and she tells her that her aunt, who she should meet prior to taking her vows. She said over the years, they continually wrote the aunt to take her as a child, as an infant, and then as a child, but she never responded until now. So Ida says, do I have to? And she says, yes. And she goes reluctantly. But when she arrives in Warsaw, it's interesting, as she's riding the cable car through the city, we see the entire city reflected on the window. She's looking at this whole new world. As we see her looking at it, we see it in the window. And it's like she's discovering a new world out there. She meets her aunt for the first time under crazy circumstances. She rings the doorbell. Her aunt comes to the door, and she says to her, she tells her who she is, and she says, I know. She comes in, and there's a man in the bed. He's getting up and getting dressed. You know, she winds up asking her aunt, why didn't she come for her? And she tells her she didn't want her at the time. And she says, so you're a Jewish nun. And now Anna, who is now Ida Lebenstein, had no idea. Her aunt says goodbye to her, takes her downstairs, kisses her off. We see Wanda judging an absurd trial, an absurd communist trial, or what was a communist trial before, of cutting down tulips with an old sword. And she sits there with a blank expression on her face, or maybe she's thinking about Ida. Anyway, she goes to the bus stop, she sees Ida, and she brings her home. And that's when the story really begins. She shares Ida's parents' history with her, Roja and Chaim, and she intends to visit their graves. Ida tells her she wants to visit their graves, but she learns they have no graves. Wanda says she has no graves. No Jews have at this point in Poland. But Wanda then decides, I'll take you. And now their odyssey begins. And the film turns into a road movie. Pavlovsky turns it into a road movie. Wanda finds, you know, in their conversation, Wanda finds that Ida has no idea of carnal love and says, what kind of sacrifice would it be to take your vows if you have no idea of the world? If you have no idea of these things? And she just looks at her. When they visit the home that was their parents, the farm, the husband denies that there were ever Jews there. While Wanda threatens him, Ida goes into the barn and sees something interesting. She sees the stained glass that her mother had made and put there. And in a sense, we begin to see a connection of Ida having this artistic bent from the beginning when she was painting the Christ statue. The same, you know, there's a transmission, so to speak, without them ever really knowing each other. And Wanda then proceeds to drive the car into a ditch because she's so angry and getting drunk. The police jail her for the night. And while Ida questions the priest where she's staying at the church, she denies having any connection to Jews. Remember, the priest says, why, do you have any connection to the Jews here? And she says, no, as if she doesn't want to admit it at that point because she's dressed as a nun. When Wanda is released, the policeman falls all over himself to apologize, you notice. And she tells him to go to hell. They pick up lists along the way. He invites them to a dance he's performing at. I love it when she says, what's in the case? And he says, a saxophone. She says, I love a saxophone, a very sensual instrument, is the way she responds to him. And he invites them to a dance they're performing at the hotel. They try to, at the same time, they're trying to track down the farmer's father. And before they do, Wanda tries to convince Ida to go to the dance. She refuses. Wanda goes, she comes back drunk. She's talking to some guy that's trying to force his way into the room, pushes him away, and she passes out on the bed. Ida goes down to watch Liz play. She likes his playing, and that's when they exchange their stories. If you remember, she tells him she's a nun, but she also found out she's a novitiate, and she just found out she was Jewish. He looks at her and he says, so I have gypsy blood. They're young people. It's like, who's to know where we come from? When they find the old man, Wanda interrogates him, and they learn that Ida's parents and her son were all killed. Wanda confesses that it was her son and that she went off to fight in the resistance. The son comes to Ida in the middle of the night and begs Ida to leave the father alone. And yet he negotiates. He has the temerity to negotiate with her that if she gives up all claims to the farm, he'll show them where they're buried. And he offers to actually shake her hand you sit there and you look at that scene and you say, this guy's totally off the tracks. But yet we know from history, and it goes unsaid here, that many Jews went back to Poland just to see where they came from. And in some cases, when they knocked on doors in Poland, the Polish thought they wanted their land back. And there are some cases where people got killed because they didn't believe them. Anyway, so this all comes from basic fact. And now he takes them, and and before they go, I love, because Liz tells her that she has you have an effect on people. He thinks she's really pretty. And then she looks at herself in the mirror. There's a scene where she takes off her habit and she looks in the mirror, and she sees the red hair flowing down, because Wanda said, you even have the red hair. And she looks at herself and she realizes she's beginning to come into herself. She sees herself in a different light. Now, when he takes them, the son takes them to the grave, and they resurrect the remains of the family. And while he's sitting in that grave, you see him sitting there, and he admits that he killed them. And she says, why aren't I in there? Why aren't I? And he said, you were so little and no one would know you were Jewish. And they just left her with the priest. Whereas the little boy, they killed because he was dark and circumcised. And he has guilt written all over him. Anyway, and then now they take the remains to Lublin, where Wanda says if the cemetery's still there, they will bury them, and they do. Wanda then takes her back, tells her how happy she was to have met her. Ida invites her to her vows, but Wanda says, no, but I'll drink to your health. I'll drink to your health. And she kisses her goodbye. I love the scene when she returns to the convent, and she's having dinner. If you remember that scene, it's a subtle little scene. She's having dinner with the other novitiates, and she starts to smile. She gets a smile on her face, a kind of awareness of where she's just been for the last few days. And the Mother Superior, the other nuns stare at her like, what's up? What's up with her? And then she goes outside and she's walking back and forth, and she confesses in private to the icon Jesus that she's not ready to take her vows. I'm not ready. I'm not ready. And she watches the others take their vows. And at the same time that she's confessing to the icon, we see Wanda poring over photos of the family. And in a sense, she too confesses to a man in the bar. We see her in the bar drinking with some guy and asking him to take her home. And she comments about how beautiful she is. And he says, who? He says, Ida. She says, Ida, how beautiful Ida is. And, and she had told her, it would have been beautiful for Roja to have seen her, for her mother to have seen what she's become. And finally, Wanda, turns on the record player, she takes a bath, and she puts on a coat and just abruptly walks out the window, abruptly commits suicide. Now, this is another incident which has been documented for various reasons among, survivor's guilt. There are those Jews who've had survivor's guilt who've committed suicide, those who no longer have family, much like Wanda in this case, and they feel, as we see Wanda does, feeling more tied to the dead than she does to the living. She looks at all these pictures. And now we see Ida coming to her apartment. She cleans it up and she puts on one of Wanda's dresses. She puts on her shoes. She starts to drink her vodka. She smokes. In essence, what is she doing? She's putting herself not only in Wanda's skin, but she's also experiencing what Wanda wanted her to experience. To know what she would be sacrificing, if she becomes a nun. At Wanda's funeral the next day, she sees Liz standing by a tree, and they go back, and they do eventually wind up in bed together. And then she asks him, what's next? What's next? And he tells her, they'll go to the beach, they'll get a dog, they'll have children, they'll buy a house. And she looks at him and she says, and then, I expected Peggy Lee to say, is that all there is? And then he says, the usual, life. But in her mind is now made up. She gets up the next morning, she puts back on her clothing, her habit, and she heads back to the convent. This film is so simple to watch, but in its simplicity, it has so much depth. It's classic in its approach. It has hints of Bergman in it, in the way it's shot, in the emotional context of the film. Also, another great director, his name was Robert Bresson, a French director, also very much in keeping with his filmmaking. The images captured by the stationary camera, the camera never moves in the film. Camera is always stationary, and it has a boxy frame. You notice that boxy frame? That's what they call that. Most Polish films of that period were shown that way. It's what they call academy aspect, for kind of 4:3 aspect. It's a period function. And to sort of say what Pawlowski wanted you to feel was you were sort of in 1962. You were watching a film that was made in 1962. And there's no music until, we hear music in the film is diegetic music, meaning the characters hear the music as well. They hear it on the radio. We hear, in the car. We hear it on Wanda's phonograph. We hear it at the dances. And the only music that the characters don't hear is that it's Bach at the end. It's a piece of Bach at the end, which he put in. Pawlowski says the real inspiration for how this film looks was his impatience with cinema itself. He doesn't like where filmmaking is going in terms of special effects, in terms of crazy camera. He wanted to make what he called an anti-cinema film, where there are no pointless camera moves, no pointless close-ups. It was a way for him of purifying, getting rid of bad habits, and doing something very simple. His family photo albums for that period also influenced him, not literally restaging them, but just the atmosphere of the photographs. In fact, some of them that Wanda's looking at are of his father's family. It's not like they're great photographs, he says, but there's something about that gave him an impulse to do it like this, to do those scenes, and to do the film this way. That's how I remember that time, through the prism of early childhood memories and from family albums. His style of shooting can be described as sympathetically objective. It deals with all these complex issues, including religion, sexuality, and loss, but shown through grace, consideration, and restraint. His camera maintains a distance. If you're conscious of the way you see the film, he maintains a distance from the characters. He never, as he says, it presumes access to their inner lives. We have to wonder what's going on in their minds. And if you notice, he kept them very low in the frame. There's a lot of space over their heads. He creates a kind of cathedral effect in the film. And so Ida and Wanda can seem small and alone in the frame. They seem much smaller because of all the space around them. But their surroundings often achieve what we call a quiet grandeur, an intimation of a divine presence, thus that space, as if maybe there is a God, even though Wanda says, don't expect to find God back there when she wants to go to visit where her parents came from. There's an implicit argument in the film between faith and materialism, one that is resolved, you know, with conviction and generosity of spirit. Mr. Pawlowski has made one of the finest European films, and I couldn't be more explicit, and one of the most insightful films about Europe, past and present, in recent memory. If one were to look for another, what I call post-Holocaust film that does the same kind of work but differently, is the German film Phoenix. The German film Phoenix, the director's name is Christian Petzold. It deals with some of the same issues that are in this film, but in a different way. You know, so the cinematography, the storytelling, the music, using John Coltrane's jazz, Mozart, that's played by Wanda, you know, using some rock and roll. All of these things really lend themselves to the atmosphere of the film. You know, so it's very interesting. The first version of the screenplay, and here's some interesting backstory to it. The first version of the screenplay, which was written by Pawlikowski and Rebecca Lankovitz, who is an English playwright. They both wrote it in English, and it had the working title called Sister of Mercy, and then he translated it into the Polish. They decided they'd rather do it in Polish, and adapted it for the filmmaking. The character of Wanda. Now, this is where it gets interesting. The character of Wanda Gruz is based on a woman whose name was Helena Walinska Bruce. Although Wanda's life and fate differ significantly from the real life model from Helena Bruce. She, like the character, Bruce was a Jewish Pole who survived World War II as a member of the communist resistance. In the post-war communist regime, she was a military prosecutor. She was, you know, here in the movie, she's known as Red Wanda. In real life, she was Red Helena. And she was involved in show trials. One example was the execution of a general who was a famed resistance fighter. But she said she had nothing to do with that trial. She wasn't the prosecutor. Pawlikowski met her in the 1980s in England. She had settled in England, where she'd emigrated in 1971. He said of her that I couldn't come to terms with this warm, ironic woman that I met, knowing that she was a ruthless fanatic and Stalinist hangman. This paradox has haunted me for years. I even tried to write a film about her, but couldn't get my head around her or into someone so contradictory. Yet he does it here. We don't see her bad side here, but we know she has a history based on the way the policeman treats her after he apologizes to her because he figures she can have him killed. Anyway, Pawlowski also had difficulty in casting the role of Anna Ida. He'd interviewed more than 400 actresses until he discovered Agata Trzebutkowska. Yeah, her spelling leaves something for me to be desired. But anyway, she was discovered by a friend of the director's who saw her sitting in a cafe in Warsaw reading a book. Hello, Lana Turner. She had no acting experience or plans to pursue an acting career. She agreed to meet with Pawlikowski because she was a fan of one of his films. And the cinematographers credited as on the film had worked with him before, and one of them quit because he didn't like what Pawlikowski wanted with the film, how to shoot it. So a second one came along and decided they chose black and white and that framing because of its evocation of the films of that era. And they designed the unusual compositions to make the audience feel uncertain, to watch in a different way. So that's really why he did it that way. And the production was interrupted mid-filming by a snowstorm, which gave them time to refine the script and find new locations and to rehearse. He said that the film coalesced for him because of that break. The editing of the film, all except, as I said, there's no background musical score, and it was done on purpose because they wanted only music that the characters would hear. And in the final scene, that only piece of music he put in because he was desperate. He said, I tried it out in mixing the scene, and it's in a minor key, but it seems serene, and to recognize the world and its complexities. That's why he chose that piece of music. So there you have it in a nutshell. Now I'd like to leave it open for conversations and see if anybody who wants to make a comment. Let's have a discussion. Who wants to go first? Who's on first? Treasure.
Yes, okay. I said at the beginning that I loved the movie. And one of the things that I did notice were all the other things that you talked about. In other words, the black and white, the lack of music. I didn't know about the camera, but everything was still, and I noticed that everything was still, and there was almost like a flatness about it, but there was still depth, and all of that to me made the movie that much richer. It just was, hearing you discuss it, I'm sitting here saying, yeah. And it was just fascinating. All of that. I mean, just everything about it was so well, really beautiful.
Thank you. And I'm glad you did have those comments, because I have to tell you, we think about this, that 2000, it had won in 2014, won the Academy Award. And here's a film that purposely was made to look like something from the 60s. And it's winning the Academy Award. No technical breakthrough, simplicity, classicism, and it was hands down, it deserved the Academy Award and it won it, which shows you, that sometimes the Film Academy gets it right. They recognize what great film is, and great film is, classic film. It's this kind of, because there's truth in that cinema. There is truth in those kinds of compositions, in those kinds of that kind of storytelling. So thank you. Who's next? Marilyn? Oh, no, Linda.
No,
Wait, Linda
go
went
ahead.
first.
Yeah. Well, first of all, the lack of dialogue, I thought, was really something that made it very unusual, very powerful. Mm-hmm. And what I liked was the scene when she was going back to the convent. She kind of stopped for a minute and looked back. You weren't sure if she was going to continue. It seemed as though she was still thinking about it. But I have a question. At the very end, where they show the nuns eating, they all began, and it made me laugh, unison. And it seemed as though, this quiet movie, it sounded like a bomb went off. That was the way that they were told to begin.
There was a bang. It was a
It wasn't a little bell, it was a bang.
It was like the Mother Superior banged her hand on the desk and said, "Now you can eat." But
Yeah,
and it
but
was
they all
funny.
begin together.
Yeah, which is interesting because in essence, it's maybe for Ida, and it's a comfortable conformity, that they can all do this together. You know, there is that scene where they shower and during the film, and there is a playful moment with them. But it's also a moment of a realization of looking at who they are, at their bodies. It's the only time they really see themselves, which is interesting. You know, it's that Wanda's so right. You know, you need to know what you're sacrificing.
Right.
If you don't know, it'll always be there in your head, or you know, it's not fair, is what she's saying. And when she does experience, I love it. You know, she puts on the shoes, she smokes, she drinks, and she falls down drunk. You know, so she encapsulates all of that in one scene. I thought was brilliant the way she does that. And the actress was terrific. She just was terrific. Thank you, Linda.
Well, Shelly, when you don't know what you're sacrificing, you're not sacrificing anything.
No, right.
That's true.
Right.
That's true. Except that, you know, you see people from the outside, and you're always
Right.
wondering what is the outside world.
But it's a wondering. So you really don't know what you're
Yeah.
sacrificing. If you
Yeah,
have-
and it's a pity, as Wanda says, that would be a pity for her not to know what she's giving up.
because then she's in a position to truly make a choice.
Yes, yes. That's great. Yes, thank you. Marilyn.
First of all, I really love that it was in black and white. It just made it so authentic. It was just excellent. What I really wanted to say is Clara put a question into the chat, and she
Okay.
said, when she finds out she's Jewish and how her family was killed, why does she go back to the convent? I have an answer, but I'd rather hear what you have to say first.
Okay, because first of all, in her mind, she has no idea what it means to be a Jew. She has absolutely no concept of what a Jew is. She's been in a convent all this time. They probably haven't discussed the Judaism. There's no reason they should have. She is devout. We see her with a picture of the Christ throughout the whole film. She does have a bit of a spiritual conflict towards the end when she decides I'm not ready, because maybe she is considering, I have to know what's going on here. But she has no affiliation to being Jewish, regardless of the fact that, yes, she knows her mother was Jewish, she knows her aunt is Jewish, that she came from a Jewish family, but it's almost alien to her. She's grown up in the Catholic faith. And, you know, to me, the question would be, why would she turn her back on that?
Right.
Why would she turn her back on that? It's not that easy to say, okay, now I'll be Jewish. I mean, she has no idea what it means. She has no idea what it means. And this has been true. There were Jewish children who were given up during the war, who either their parents were taken away and somebody hid them. There were Jewish parents who gave their children over to convents to be raised, and some of them were raised, did become nuns. Some of them became Catholic and never knew they were Jewish, unless family managed to find them. So this is all, you know, this is reality. This really strikes at reality. Marilyn.
So two things. Well, Madeleine Albright's a perfect example, isn't she?
Yes.
She really, really is. But I also thought something else towards the end of the movie, when she's with the sax player, I forget his name, and he's
Liz.
what
Yeah,
life
Liz.
is, and what's next, and what's next. And when she needs the straight and narrow, she needs to know the blue box goes on the green shelf beside the yellow ribbon, and too much freedom. I mean, she's not brought up with that mindset. And I think that would scare the hell out of her, to not controlled and to have that kind of freedom. I don't think she could have handled that. That's what I think.
I tend to agree with you. I think she also felt like, but where is where is, it's almost like she doesn't ask him. The unspoken question to Liz is, where is God in all of this? Where is God in all of this? Where is faith? Where is what I have been brought up to understand? Where does that fit into this plan? And it doesn't fit into his plan. And I think that's also disturbing. It's like Wanda says, you have to know what you're sacrificing. Well, take the coin on the other side. If she goes with Liz, she's sacrificing something she grew up with, something she fell in love with, her faith and that notion. So, she knows what she's sacrificing on that end. So she does have that choice. And you're right, she wants what she had.
Because she wants to feel safe.
Yes,
That gives her
exactly.
safety.
Yeah, it does. Treasure.
Yeah, she also didn't just grow up as a Catholic. I mean, she grew up in a convent.
And yes.
That was her whole life was religion. I mean, she was never exposed to anything else. She knew nothing else.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it was not where she was, in a secular home that was just devout Catholic.
Right.
She was in a convent.
Yeah.
But she must have developed relationships with other nuns there that she began to love for the care that they
that
gave her.
too.
That was her family.
Yeah, they were her family. I mean, even the novitiate she was close with, and she watched them become nuns, and I think that affected her somewhat, even though she wasn't ready at that point. And then she had to discover, why am I not ready? Why am I not ready? These are questions, you could see in her mind, saying, why, wanting to answer the question. She doesn't know the answer. And when she goes back to bury her aunt, she begins to come to that. She's also, even though she has that moment with Liz, outside of Liz, she's alone in the world, outside of the convent. She now has no family left. They're all gone. So she doesn't even have an aunt to connect with. Which is interesting. So, all of these, that's why I say this film is so rich in its depth, in the questions one can ask and think about. Arlette, you had your hand up.
Unmute.
You have to unmute, Arlette.
Unmute, Arlette. Unmute.
Okay. Well, I basically was already said, where do people feel comfortable? In a positive zone that gives them nurturing, that gives them taking them into relationships with the other gals that became nuns. Agreed, that's all she knew. But I'll tell you something, when I first saw her aunt, and I saw this film years ago, who wants to be near her? That was a negative force, in my opinion, so negative, unbelievably in the beginning of the film, that it was amazing that she eventually kind of moved towards trying to discover herself, which of course never came to be. So she went back to her comfort zone, as simple as that. And like you said, Marilyn, everything is written out for you. That's it. She didn't have to do any extra work on her own. And that's where she found herself. I did want to say, I don't know his name. It was not only a priest, it was a young man. During the war, his parents sent him to, I think it was Switzerland. And in that family, who was Christian, he had read the books and he really loved what it said about Christianity. He ended up becoming, I believe, a bishop of France, just of France. And he said, when he was asked, why did you convert to Christianity? And he said, because I was in awe of what I read, not because I was Jewish, to protect myself. And on his deathbed, not only was it a Christian funeral, but he also had a group of Jewish people and in his congregation, not his, but other congregations that knew of him and other rabbis that came around at his funeral. So it was a joint venture. I just wanted to mention that. Religion covers all kinds of phases. That's it.
Thank you, Arlette. Yes, by the way, there was a film made several years ago, and it's called The Jewish Cardinal.
Yes.
Maybe that was him.
That was, yes, and he was
Yeah.
being considered at one point for the papacy. There was a point because he was very close to the Pope, to John Paul XXIII.
Yeah.
And he was considered in the running for the papacy, and he was Jewish, and his father was still alive when he had become a cardinal. And they had made peace with each other. Well, how many Jewish fathers can go around and say my son's a cardinal? I mean, that's
Right.
think about that. That's a feather in your cap.
It was a great movie.
Yeah, yes, it was. And this one, by the way, if you want to see, you watch his follow-up movie, which is available on Amazon, Cold War, is an interesting film because it also deals with Poland. It's also a Polish film, but it is a loosely told tale of his mother and father. He changes around what they do, what they did, but it is a story that's loosely based on his parents' relationship. It's a very interesting film, and so I highly recommend it. Also, an Academy Award nominee. Anybody else have anything they'd like to add? Yeah.
I
Go
felt that the movie was more about Wanda, actually, even than Ida. Her history was amazing, and the history they showed about Poland was really deep. My first cousin's wife was raised in a Catholic home. Her parents gave her away, and she didn't know she was Jewish till she was 16 years old. And they sent her to some relatives in New York when she was 16 years old because she was starting to date. And it was such a deep movie. I was so moved by them showing the details and the burial and the killing and the houses. And when you talk about after the war, my parents were from, my father was from Celts. After the war, the Jews who went back to Celts, there was a pogrom, and all the Poles killed the people who came back. They survived the war and they got killed after the war.
Oh, my.
Yeah.
Well, that was common. It's like, I'm just telling you about one town. That was, and I thought
Yeah,
the movie was very deep about Wanda and her life. And I was very sad when Ida was going back to the convent. I was a little confused also because she didn't take this, they didn't show her on the bus or the train. So they just showed her walking, and I was hoping maybe she wasn't going back to the convent. That was my hope the whole time as she was walking down the street, the lane.
Yeah, no, she was actually destined to go back. I mean, when we in the final analysis of the film, but it was an extremely interesting journey that we were able to take with these characters. Thank you, Susan Metch.
I was going to just say that I saw the movie twice because I take your advice about this and see it twice. The first time I was just really captivated by the whole thing, but the black and the white and the gray and the winter and the cold set the mood for this whole thing. And here was this aunt, and I remember what she asked first when Ida went to visit her. She said, "Why didn't you take me from the orphanage? Why didn't you take me?
Right.
Why am I here now if you didn't want to take me?" And the obvious answer was to let her know what her past was so she could make a choice. And it really opened up all the old wounds for her aunt. It was just so, you could see her just falling apart really in a lot of ways. And I didn't know that much about Poland. I know a lot of stories, and I know there's a lot of anti-Semitism, but it really bothered me about the keeping of the house, that they killed him because they wanted that house. The father saved them, and the son killed them. So I thought this was a wonderful movie, and the not having a lot of dialogue really was very good. And actually, the interactions and the lack of dialogue, which we've seen in a couple of movies, actually.
Yes, well, you'll see that You'll see them in more that I present. So I'm
Well,
glad you're
I
used
thought
to
it
it.
was an excellent choice. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
I don't
Thank
think
you.
it's just because they wanted the house, because it sounded like the father of the guy who killed them was feeding them in the woods, and the son killed them.
Yes.
Because if the
That's
Poles found out that they were supporting a Jewish family, if the Germans found out that the Poles were supporting a
They
Jewish
would kill
family,
the
they would have
sons.
been killed. So
Mhm.
it was complicated. It wasn't just the house.
Well, it was complicated then. After the war, though, when people came back to Poland, if any Jews returned to Poland, to try and claim their land, they would be killed.
Yes.
That happened. That actually happened. I mean, you presented one of those cases. It's the same thing. It's a situation that still goes on. There's another film that deals with that. A film called Aftermath. It's a Polish film about two brothers, one who
Mhm.
returns from the States after being
Right.
away for about 15 years. The other brother had lived there on the family farm, which technically wasn't theirs. And then the brother who returns starts digging up. They find out that he's been digging up. What the Nazis did was they took Jewish tombstones during the war. This is true, to pave the roads. They took Jewish
That's right.
tombstones. And in the film, he takes the tombstones and he resurrects. He creates a cemetery in the field in their name. And the brother thinks he's totally crazy. But that's because he feels the guilt. And we eventually learn that the farm was not theirs. And that's why he begins to do this. It's an absolutely terrific film about that period, about it's contemporary, about what goes on. So I highly recommend that one as well. Anybody else? Anybody else have a question, comment? Nobody? Oh, okay. Okay. Anyway, so next month we have The King's Choice. The King's Choice, an Academy Award nominee. It is a terrific film about he was the king of Norway. Actually, well, you'll find out how somebody from Denmark became the king of Norway when I present the film. But it takes place during the advent of World War II, naturally. And it's a big film. It's an epic feeling film. And it shows that he was basically running from the Nazis. They were after him. And it's about his escape, his odyssey, getting out of Norway, and what ensued with the government at the time, the intrigue that went on. It's a very, very interesting film, very colorful film, very well acted film about World War II itself. So I look forward to hearing your comments on that and breaking that one down for you. So I will look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.